Alright, I've had my printer for about a week and a half now. I've done some pretty interesting prints. I think I have a pretty good idea of what some of the problem areas are, so I'm ready to design my own thing. Here we go! For my first project, I decided to take inspiration from something I use quite often, my brush holder for my paint brushes. I've outgrown this brush holder. Its holes are rather small, only had 3 big holes, and most of my brushes were actually bigger than the small holes now. And I also use modeling tools and things like that to store in this caddy. So I picked out my calipers and my ruler and started drawing, and came up with a little hole pattern that would hold my ruler, most of my brushes, some of my modeling tools, pencils, pens, markers, things like that. And so now we'll take that into the software. Okay, now for the layout. So I started off with a program called Tinkercad, tinkercad.com. It was the simplest program I could find to build the initial STL file, which you'll then use to feed the printer and print. And so I started with a box, and I flattened that box out to 1/8 inch thick. That's the same dimension as the MDF that I had on the old brush holder. And then I went ahead and stretched it out to about 7 inches long and about 3 inches wide. And that gives me about the same layout as I had before. And then I'll make the legs so that the whole thing stands about 3 inches high. And let's see, so this all kind of fits my diagram. So I went ahead and made a cylinder and squished that cylinder down to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Made it a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch, and that'll give me the opening for my main brush holders. And I followed the plan and kind of made 5 of those across, just doing a quick Control C, Control V to copy and paste that. And I kept it up on the top so that I'd have a reference circle. So if I wanted to make more, it's easy to keep that one up there. And I found that I could probably fit a 6th one in here. But if I did that, that'll kind of get into the area right above the legs, and I didn't really want that. I didn't want the hole to collide with the legs, so I left that one off. And next I made a area for my ruler, and so I started with a box, and I stretched that box to about 1.5 inches wide. That's the width of my ruler, and gave it about 1/4 of an inch in width. So 1/8 inch wide, 1/4 inch long, and then set the depth to 1/8 inch, so I just go through the whole depth of the material here. And put that in the back, because you don't want the ruler in the front, because then that'll interfere with reaching to get everything else, because the ruler is going to be one of the tallest objects in the holder. And so I figured out where I wanted that, placed it there, again made sure it wasn't going to interfere with a leg, and also gave me plenty of room for other holes, kind of give it at least 1/8 of an inch off of the back surface so that I wouldn't get too close and not have enough material there to give me some structure. And then I went ahead and made another one, a copy of that one, and this one will be for my calipers. And so the calipers are a lot skinnier, so I'll make that hole a lot skinnier. And take it down to about 1/2 inch, maybe a little bit more, just to give it a little wiggle room. And also, again, keep that in the back, because the calipers are also going to be really tall. And get that size just right. And it's right in the position I wanted it. So then I make a little bit bigger holes here, so I grab the hole and stretch it one way and stretch it the other to make it up to 3/4 of an inch, nope, 1 inch by 1 inch. And this will be for my larger brushes and things like my cutting knife and things like that. And so I'll put those also in the back, because those items are usually taller. And again, want to give it clearance for the legs, and give it a little bit of clearance on the sides to make sure its structural integrity is good. And I'm going to want 2 of these, So once I find the right spot, I'll just plant it there. And there's going to be two of these big holes. So I'll just take this and drop it on. And I've got to be careful not to cross over any of the ruler holes or the caliper holes. Don't want to have it so that everything just runs into each other. Get everything nice and balanced, and then I'll take my original hole and again make it a little bit bigger, so I'll make a copy of it. And these holes will be a little bit, well, actually put a couple more in here because I've got plenty of brushes and small items like shaping tools for clay and things like that that I might want to put in here. So I'll just drag these into position. They're all 1/2 inch holes. And paste a few more up there. And one thing about the 1/2 inch holes is they won't quite hold my Sharpie or my cutting tool, so I need to make those a hole for those, and that'll be a little bit bigger. And again, I want to make sure it's not going to interfere with any other holes or the legs. And just checking my drawing to make sure I don't have anything I'm missing. Oops. We'll just accidentally moved that, so we'll just Control Z and get that back into its original position. That is one thing I don't like about this program, is sometimes it's kind of hard to grab objects, and so you accidentally grab the base object and move it around, but Control Z easily corrects that back to where it was. Just don't do anything after you've moved it, because then it's really hard to get back. And what I found is it's usually easiest to click on the work plane and then click and drag on the small object, and you're more likely to grab it and move it. Because if you just grab it while it's clicked on, then you end up grabbing all the little connectors that resize it in different directions. And once you get an object so small, it's really, there's a lot of connectors that you can accidentally grab, so it's hard to find a spot to just grab the object and move it. So now I'm going to expand that from 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch, and so I'll do that in both directions. And then I noticed, oh, some of these circles down below aren't exactly round. Somehow I had accidentally got 5/8 by 1/2 inch on the circles, so they were more ovals. So now I'll go back and correct each one, bring it back to 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch. Bring it back to a circle. So I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so now I'll place my 5/8 inch by 5/8 inch hole over on the side. This will be the bigger hole for Sharpies and larger brushes. And this one on the other side will be for my cutting tool. I just like to use those retractable blades. They squeeze in there really nice, and they're easy to sharpen. Okay, now checking against my diagram. My original drawings, looks like everything's about the same. I've got my two 1-inch holes, my two 5/8 inch holes, and all the 1/2 inch holes I could squeeze on here. We can maybe squeeze a couple more 1/2 inch holes in here. Again, Control Z to get back to where I was. Like I said, sometimes it's really hard to grab those objects if they're all the same height. So I wonder it might be easier just to make the holes more than 1/8 of an inch, just so they're easier to grab. I'm going to try that on my next project. Alright, so we'll just shrink the whole work surface down so that all the holes stick up more, so I can grab them. Now I kind of have everything where I want it. Make the main surface 1/8 of an inch. And I'm thinking I'm going to add a couple of little bitty areas, little 1/8 by 1/8 inch holes, squares. And I'll put those 1/8 of an inch apart. And those will be for if I want to add on something later. So little brackets for add-on adapters. That way if I want to add something to hold a pair of pliers or something like that to the front of the back of the unit, it'll be easy to do with a little clip that has some teeth in it. So just it's always nice on your designs if you can have a little bit of forward thinking. And one other thing I've been thinking about is maybe doing like some kind of polygon in the corners and using that to mount the legs. That way if somebody's printer can't handle the full height of this plate along with the width, then maybe it can split it into smaller parts. And plus that'd give you the ability to reuse the legs if you don't like this. Maybe you have 2 or 3 plates for different types of tools and just want to keep one set of legs stored. That way you're not having to store several of the whole containers. But I think for this design I'll just keep it simple and mount the legs directly onto the plate. And if I go 1/8 of an inch gap, I end up touching that circle there, so I've got to rethink that. Should I go 1/4 inch gap on the front, 1/8 inch gap on the back? That's going to be kind of awkward. Everything won't be interchangeable. Don't like that concept. I'd like to be able to move my add-on adapters front and back. So I'll play with the spacing on these a little bit. Might not match my original drawing, but that's okay. Plans don't always match. I want it to be at least 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, but I don't want to interfere with the circle or the other holders. Alright, so now we'll select everything, we'll group it, and that way it'll make the actual holes so I can see how everything lays out. That looks pretty good. Alright, for the legs I wanted a ball and claw kind of design. Luckily, you don't have to design everything yourself nowadays. You can go on Thingiverse, and people have already put a lot of things out there, so you can do what they call remix, where you take their product and remix it into something, assuming they give you permission to do so. This ball and claw design does give permission, so I'm going to remix that into mine, and then I'll give him credit in the description. So, basically when you download, you'll get an STL file, or a zip, and you unzip that into the STL file. Then you take the STL file and you import it into Tinkercad. Can't just drag and drop, but if you go up to the little corner, there's an import option. You'll choose to import it. You can either browse for it or just drop it onto the import box. Then it'll take a minute to import, and so we'll fast forward past that. Once it's imported, then you'll be able to edit it. And in this case, what I want to do is take off the top of the unit. So we'll go ahead and create a box, and this box will be a whole box. And so being that this box is a whole, it will extract rather than build. So it will go ahead and eliminate what's already there and just cut the part off at the bottom of the box. That way I have a nice flat surface to mount to my little top of my caddy. Okay, now that we've got the leg imported, then we'll go ahead and take that top piece off. He designed it to be mounted to some kind of wooden box or something like that. I think actually a metal box for his 3D printer. But we'll go ahead and take that part off. I don't need that for my design. And so we'll take that empty box, the whole box that we created, and we'll lift it up to the same level as the extra part. Move it over, align it, kind of expand it out. So we'll drag it one way and drag it the other way and kind of get it to where we want it. And then we'll spin the part around. You can do that by just right-clicking on the mouse and dragging it around. So now we can see that the part wasn't aligned at all, so we move that box over, stretch it up a little bit, stretch it down, get everything just how we want it. And then once we've got it how we want it, we'll go ahead and select both the box and the claw foot. And still got a little bit of tweaking here. Had a couple of pieces out there and we don't want those printed. Alright, now it looks like everything's covered. And I moved it down just a little bit so I can get a nice flat surface down there past all the little vines that were creeping down the leg. Now we'll select both the box and the claw and we'll group them. Now they're one piece, which means that the hole is created. And boop, now it's flat. And now we'll stretch it out to get it to the size I want it. Because I do want my rack to be at about 3 inches high. I'm going to go ahead and push it down just a hair so it's down through the surface. That'll give it a more flat bottom. The original design was rounded on the bottom, and that didn't make it any more stable. So I want to give it a little bit more flat of a bottom, and that should make it a little bit more stable, a little bit more surface area to stand on, so that when I put that ruler in there it won't just flop over, because that ruler is pretty tall. And stretch it up to get it to the close to 3 inches, and then we'll make it a little skinnier so it doesn't take up quite so much space. And we'll make it skinny in both directions so it's not some kind of weird oblong thing. It doesn't distort the original design too much. And once I have it just how I want it, then I will do a right click, or just actually a Control C to copy, and Control V a couple of times to paste it, and give myself 4 legs. And then I'll kind of spread those out and position it. It's going to take me a minute to position it, so we'll kind of skip through some of that. Okay, so I'll just position it right where I want it. Kind of make sure I've got a little bit of leeway from the edge, so I'm not printing right on the edge and trying to join there. Originally I thought about putting some hexes through the middle so I could just snap it on later. I might end up doing that with the final design, just so it gives it a little bit more flexibility. But now that I've got my legs where I want it, I select everything, group them again. That makes everything a single object. And double check that everything is where I want it. And then I'll go ahead and save it. So there's an option to export. And I'll export it as an STL file so I can send that to Cura, which is the slicer I use. And the slicer will prepare it for print. Okay, now it's printing. I printed it with the top side down. That way I had the most flat surface covered and didn't have to worry about the any supports being built, because if you built with the legs face down, then you'd have to build a bunch of supports so that the bed could be built. This way it's easier. Also, if you built it sideways, your circles might not end up quite round. So built it that way. Now prototype testing. So I went ahead and put in some of my stuff, and it seems to fit pretty well. So the smallest holes are too small for the big stuff, but just right for the markers and pencils and things like that. And the ruler fits in just right. I'll show you here in a second. There it goes. Alright, so the ruler fits, but then when I bump into stuff, it kind of flails around pretty easily. The holes might be a little bit too big, and then the ruler makes the whole thing a little bit wobbly. So I think I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board on parts of it and redo some of these holes a little bit smaller, because obviously if it's not going to hold the paintbrushes up, that's no good. Don't want paint going all over everything. So I'll make some holes smaller, and back to the drawing board. So we're back inside the Tinkercad, and I'm getting rid of some of the 1/2 inch holes and making some smaller holes and squeezing in as many as I can. Also made the hole for the gauges a little bit bigger for the calipers. And now that I've moved stuff around, I can easily get my expansion slots on there, and I can even put some expansion slots on the side now. So that way if I want to expand, like I said earlier, if I want to put on some pliers or something like that, then I can do that. And by the way, I didn't get this good at the software this quick. I'm just fast forwarding it a little bit because I explained how to do most of this stuff. And got everything. Also, I had one of the holes a little bit too close to the edge, so I fixed that as well. And going in and tinkering with the legs, and now I deleted all the extra holes, selected everything, and saved it, and back to the printer. And this time it works great. So a few tips I've learned while I've been doing this printing for the last week and a half. 1, bed leveling is critical, and you have to do it often. Pretty much anytime you get rough by scraping a part off, you're probably going to have to re-level. Anytime you bump it pretty hard, you're going to have to re-level. Also, when you're leveling, be sure you're not leaning on something. For example, it's pretty tempting to put your hand on the crossbar and use that to rest your hand while you're adjusting the level. Don't do that. That throws everything off. So bed leveling is important. Next is, it's still a PC. There's been quite a few problems that I've had with the printer where one of the stepper motors would stop working or something, and just rebooting it fixed it. So it's still a PC, rebooted every once in a while. Infill can be low. There's no real reason to do like 100% infill. 10 or 20% is good on most stuff. Take notes. Make note of what your resolution, your infill, your filament, all that stuff is, so that you can note it later. Alright, so here's the final version, and going ahead and testing it. Pencils fit a lot tighter. The brushes fit a lot tighter. There's still a little wiggle room on some of the brushes. This little scraper wouldn't go in the small hole, so it had to go in the big hole. And it's got a lot of room around it, so I think it might tilt or fall, but the only thing I could do there is maybe make a small hole with a slot in it specifically for that scraper. And I might do that as an add-on later. But you'll notice all the parts went in pretty smooth. Even got the razor blade in the back there, and the ruler goes in. Ruler still causes it to be a little tippy, but it works. And here's the final version. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from my mistakes, and good luck on your own builds. Thanks. Please subscribe.